Have you ever heard a truly incredible sounding home theater system? I'm Joe with Gramophone, and today we're lucky enough to be sitting with Joe Walters. Joe,
Hey, Joe.
you work for Wisdom Audio.
I do. 6 years now, of all things.
Wow, okay. And we just installed in our Timonium, Maryland location, or I should say Joe just installed, a whole series of upgrades to our Wisdom Theater that we have here. And Joe, I was kind of blown away when you did the demo just now because both in 2-channel mode and the home theater cuts that you played, it sounded incredible. So what I think we'd like to do here is just, if you can, just briefly give us some of the background of Wisdom, because you guys have a background in audio that's different from what most people have done. So if you can summarize that for us a little bit.
So Wisdom Audio comes from Bollinger Graebner BG Radia. I've actually got a couple dealers around the U.S. that still have BG Radia products in their theaters. So that product is where we came from. We were building $600,000 2-channel audio systems with 15-foot tall speakers and 10-foot tall subwoofers, and not exactly the most wife-friendly, setup in the world. But behind that big box stuff was the design of planar magnetic drivers, which is where BG Radia really shined in that technology. And that was in the mid-90s when BG Radia was formed. 2005 is when we became Wisdom Audio and really transitioned from big 2-channel monster speakers into more of a architectural, design-friendly, high-performance, super high output, but yet still be able to blend into a room seamlessly, to keep the designers happy, to keep the architects happy, and to keep the homeowners, singing, all the time because the stuff sounds so good.
And the reason that's all so important, Joe, is that most of the time there are some serious compromises that you make when you go away from traditional box loudspeakers and you start concealing things in walls and ceilings. But a lot of people simply aren't going to accept the compromise of having to live with oftentimes bigger and bigger and bigger boxes in their living room or wherever they're going to listen. So the fact that Wisdom makes truly high performance, and I think I can now say spectacular performance products that can be completely concealed if you need them to be, that's a huge plus, and it's the main reason why we like what you guys do. So before we now talk about how spectacular all that sounded, Joe, let's just talk a little bit about the difference between a calibrated theater and one that is not calibrated from an audio perspective, because you can buy a lot of good products from a lot of good manufacturers, put them together, and it might sound terrific in your listening room or pretty good or maybe even just okay. What you guys specialize in is being able to calibrate that theater, and if you can just talk a little bit about that.
So calibration is really the final piece of any audio system. If it's 2-channel, multi-channel, theater, it doesn't really matter how complex or simple the system is. Having it calibrated in the end is really what turns it from a good system to a great system. The engineers spend a lot of time in the factory designing loudspeakers, doing anechoic measurements and all this kind of stuff, but as soon as you put it into a room, all bets are off, right? And so what we do when we come in, we have a website called nevertoolatetocalibrate.com. We have our world tour on there, so you can see all the places that we're going and all the places that we've been, lots of pictures and cool stuff about how we do our calibrations. We are a company that does not do remote calibrations. I would never call Joe and tell him where to put a microphone and then have him take measurements and then say, well, just make these tweaks and you're going to be fine. That's not how we do stuff. All of our calibrations are done on site by factory personnel. We come in, the first thing we do is we do a system check, right? So the first thing you do is make sure everything is wired and outputting sound where it's supposed to. So we have a test tone that we can play for Atmos and all the channels to make sure when you hit this noise, it comes out of that speaker. That's the most basic thing. You'd be amazed at how many times stuff comes from the wrong speakers or it's improperly configured.
Just simple miswiring.
Simple miswiring. And then what we do is, the first thing we do is we check polarity. And today in the Gramophone theater, we ran into some issues with phase problems. Phase and polarity are different. Polarity means that the speaker is either wired positive, positive, or positive and negative, so it's out of phase, it's out of polarity. But phasing is a much more in-depth thing. So the first thing we look at is polarity. We measure all the speakers with a popper. So we do an impulse response on the speaker. We measure it to see if it's in phase or out of phase, if it's proper polarity, or if it's out of polarity first. That's the very first thing that you do, making sure that everything is the way it's supposed to be. And then I'll do a level check, so I'll just do a quick level check to kind of set all my levels to be the same level at the reference listening position. And that's another thing, is that people don't realize that no matter how big of a theater you build, whether it's got 20 seats or 3 seats, everything is always calibrated for one reference listening position. If you have an Atmos system, it works best for one person. If you go to a theater with 400 seats, it might work best for like 6 seats. But that's it. It doesn't work for all the other seats, right? So you have to look at all that, where you make your measurements. And then we do phase alignment. So I do an impulse response. I send pink noise from my little device back through the processor, and then my microphone records that. So I have a reference to listen to. It's called a loopback. Send that out, it listens to it, and then I can see on there electronically if my speakers are in phase or if they're out of phase, or in polarity, out of polarity. And so I can fix that if that's going on. And then what we do is we use delay so that we line up all those phase traces for all the woofers, all the speakers. So everything is all operating together. That's the biggest thing. If you can just do a phase alignment with your subwoofers to your main speakers, and you don't do anything else, that's like 90% of a calibration. And that's the hardest thing to do, especially have multiple subs. Because if you've got 4 subwoofers in a room, here we have 2, but if you've got 4, all those subs are at a different distance from the listening position. And when they're making bass, they're all working against each other unless they're phase aligned so that they're all hitting at the same time. And you can put a polarity pulse through 4 subs that aren't phase aligned, and it'll sound like, you'll hear a pop and a pop. And it might be really fast, but if they're not hitting together, you'll have bass, but you'll sit there and go, I don't know what's wrong, but it just doesn't sound right. That's the best way I can describe when you get into a room that hasn't been calibrated, that sounds okay, and it probably still sounds better than, your sound bar that you bought at, on Black Friday for $199. But if it's not all working together, it just doesn't work, right? So then we phase align all the subwoofers, all the speaker wire, all the speakers to each other so that everything is working together. Once we do that, then I'll actually go in and look at we have a target curve. So, if you saw a theater, from bass, mid, and then down to your highs, it kind of rolls off a little bit. And so we have that up on my screen, and then I start working with my pink noise. So it's putting noise through all the speakers at the same level. And then I can see that against my target curve, and then I start to make adjustments based on that target curve. Before I do that though, a lot of times if you see some really big dips or there's a W dip or something like that, typically those are room problems, not speaker problems.
Yeah.
And the big advantage with Wisdom and our DSP amplifiers, of course, is that we know exactly what our speaker should be doing, and we know how to correct the anomalies of the speaker with the DSP that we have in our amplifiers. So I have a good idea what that curve should look like out of the box. And if I see something really weird like I did in here, then I'll take my microphone, I'll do a near field measurement to the speaker. So I'll put it right in front of the speaker, take a measurement, and see if that weird stuff goes away. Then I know it isn't a speaker thing, it's a room thing, right? And depending on the room, you can either fix that or you can't fix it. Most times if there's a room problem, maybe if there's a big peak it's adding, I can squish that down a little bit, but if there's a dip, you can't fix that.
Right.
And a lot of people that use things like, Dirac or the Optimizer or Odyssey or Room Perfect, all those tools are good tools for people that, don't really know how to do the mechanical part of the calibration like we do the manual part. But you also have to understand how to manipulate those things. So when you see a big dip in a room that's caused by the room, you can't just say to the easy button, just fix it. You have to tell it, this is a room problem, and you have to say, don't fix that. Otherwise, it'll try to take a big hole and squish it up, and then you're chewing up a bunch of amplifier power, and that's how you blow things up and make things sound worse.
And after 7 years with a major subwoofer company, I can attest that if that's how you try to treat it, just by driving that thing higher, you're robbing all the dynamics from the system.
Yeah.
You're not going to fix the problem, number one, but number two, you will also now have made the whole system sound worse because the dynamics are gone. And the bottom line of all the different things that you just described, Joe, is that a calibrated system, we can guarantee that you're going to be happy with the sound quality because there's no guessing involved. It's actually measuring what's happening and fixing the problems.
Yeah.
So now let's talk a little bit about what happened when we played music and a few movie cuts, because the first thing you did was actually not a home theater demo per se, it was a 2-channel demo in that room. And the song Birds, which has just enough going on with it that you can hear all the details, because it's not 80 different instruments all playing at once. It's such a simple song. I was amazed by how clear and open it sounded on the high end, but without any harshness or distortion. So that was a big plus for me. When you played the Hans Zimmer cut, so now there's a full orchestra and screaming electric guitars, the drums. It's easy to have loud bass. It's not so easy to have loud, tight, clean, clear bass, which is exactly what we were getting. And you could hear each of the different instruments so clearly within that mix. And then, of course, when you played a few movie cuts with all the explosion sort of thing that Hollywood is really good at, having heard the system with music more than once, I already knew that the movies were going to sound fantastic, and they did.
Yeah. So it's funny that you say that. When we do calibrations and also when I do demos, you always start with 2-channel, because if you can make 2-channel sound good, the theater part's easy, right? Because they're already putting everything where it's supposed to go. But 2-channel, to get a solid center image, which is one of the things I was having problems with, I told you, as I was trying to figure out in the signal chain, where there were some phase problems, I had no image. It was just a wishy-washy sound coming from everywhere. And all of a sudden, when we hit it today, it was like, you got that rock solid center image. And what's great about the L75s you guys have in there, the line source speakers, when you're in the middle and you're listening, people are going like this because they think there's more speakers on in the room, because the way that the line source works, it's very enveloping. I did another dealer's showroom down in Florida, and they just had our big LS4s, which are full line source, and a couple subs. They didn't have anything else in the system yet. And he goes, I don't know if I need any more speakers because there is stuff going on everywhere in this room.
Yes.
And, that's a big benefit of having that line source and the clarity and having so many octaves of information coming out of a single driver. It really makes a big difference. And again, if you can make 2-channel sound good, the rest, surround sound is pretty easy to do.
And especially, of course, with the cut Birds, because it's a female vocal. As you so well know, if a speaker system can't get vocals, can't get that part of the frequency spectrum that we all are listening to all the time, if it can't get vocals right, it doesn't really matter what else it's doing right or wrong. It's never going to sound right.
Right.
But that first cut you played, simple female voice, not too much else going on, just sounded fantastic.
Yeah.
You mentioned line source.
Correct.
If you can just briefly touch on line source versus line array and why you do what you do with so much of your product line.
Sure. So everybody's been to a concert. Well, most everybody's been to a concert. I'm old, so I've been going to concerts for a long time. Back in the old days, you had a wall of sound on the stage. It was just a wall of speakers. And if you were in the front, it was like, holy cow, it was like ripping your face off, right? Now they have these really nice J-rigs, so they hang from the ceiling and they kind of go like this. And it's a whole bunch of point source speakers that are tied together to make a line array. The benefit of a line array is that if you're in the front of the theater or in the back of the theater, the sound power is pretty much the same. That's the benefit. You don't have that wall of sound in the front anymore. Now you get really good sound everywhere. That's why a line array is great for concerts, very high output, very consistent sound, but it's still a bunch of point source speakers put together. So you still are spraying sound up, spraying sound down, spraying sound side to side. That's why concerts always sound better outside, because you don't have a ceiling, right? You don't have walls.
Reflection.
You don't have all those extra reflective sounds, right? With a line source speaker, which is what we do, it's different. It does the same, it has the same benefits, so you have equal sound over distance. A line source and a line array lose 3 dB of output for every doubling of distance. So the further you get away, it doesn't change the volume that much. With a point source speaker, it's 6 dB, so you lose twice as much as you get further away. And an example would be if you've ever been to a buddy's party and they got a big pair of speakers in the living room and they're just cranking them, and you're like, whoa, nobody's in the living room because you can't talk because it's too loud, so you're in the next room. That's what a point source speaker does. With a line source speaker, you can stand right next to it or you can be 20 feet away from it, and the level is the same because the way that a line source speaker works, so this is half of a line source driver. This is actually a speaker right here. That's a planar magnetic driver. It's just a piece of aluminum that's bonded to another material, and then we laser cut the voice coil right in. This is actually the voice coil. Put magnets on the front, magnets on the back, and that becomes your speaker. I mean, there's a little more to it. We have to tension it and do some other stuff, but that's really it. So 2 of these are 48 inches tall, and you need 48 inches to make a line source. So as remember I told you, a line array, it's scatter sound up and down and side to side. So if you have a ceiling, you get reflections off the ceiling, you get reflections off a floor. A line source, the sound, if you could picture the sound coming off the speaker, it literally comes off like a cylinder. It doesn't spray up and it doesn't spray down. So what you hear is unreflected sound. You hear direct sound first, plus you just eliminated half of the surfaces in the room from being reflective surfaces. So much more clarity. Plus this little line source plays 6 octaves. So it's playing all the way down to 350 hertz or so, all the way up past 20K with a single driver. You're not crossing from a tweeter to a mid-range to another mid-range to a woofer. You just have one driver that's playing all those frequencies. One of the gentlemen in there, I don't remember who he was, when we were playing that scene from Interstellar and the little robot thing was scraping in the water, he goes, I've never heard that before. I've never heard that sound before. And that's the clarity and the distortion that's so low on a planar magnetic and a line source speaker. That is just a huge benefit of that. And we're really the only company in consumer that makes line source speakers, true line source speakers.
And just to clarify, so many of the dynamic speakers that are out there using a conventional tweeter, they might be crossed over at 2,000 cycles, 1,800, something like that.
3,500 typical.
3,500, yeah. So the low ones would be 2,000 or 18, and this is going all the way down to 300 cycles.
300. This one is a point source PMD. This thing plays 5 octaves, so that little driver plays down to 650 hertz all by itself. These are lighter than the air that they have to move. And if you think about tinfoil, right? If you take something out of the oven, it's hot. As soon as you take it out of the oven with tinfoil, it's immediately cool. Right? So you think about a speaker that has a voice coil wrapped on a formant that's down inside of a big magnet, it's inside of a big structure. That's where all the heat is generated. There's no place for that heat to go. It goes into the magnet, it goes into the pole piece, and it just retains the heat. With a planar magnetic, this is what's at the surface. It's got a couple magnets on the front and a couple magnets on the back, but it dissipates the heat as fast as it's created. So much higher output. There's no power compression, so you can play it loud for a long period of time without it being fatiguing because the distortion is so low. I mean, I've done calibrations and I'll sit in the theater and put my mic up and I'll have my computer on with a SPL meter going, and I'll have the client come in when I'm all done, and he'll be playing 100 dB, and he'll see that, and we'll sit there and have a conversation. And he's like, how is that possible? How can you have a conversation when it's playing that loud? Because there's no distortion. And that's really the truth of it is, I also tell people you have to be really careful with planar magnetics because you can play them really loud, but they don't sound loud because they're not distorting.
Right.
It's a huge difference. And so you really got to watch that when you're turning the things up.
Right. So this incredibly lightweight driver is dissipating the heat the whole time. So the end of the concert video is going to sound every bit as good as the beginning of the concert.
That's right.
Maybe what we'll do next, Joe, is start talking a little bit about the various speaker models in your line.
Sure. So we make 3 different lines of speakers: Insight, Sage, and Wisdom. Kind of good, better, best. I like to say it's like 1080p, 4K, and 8K, right? So you just go up in resolution. We have point source and line source in all of the model lines, except for Wisdom, which is only line source, full line source, no dynamic drivers. The good product, the Insight product, is all passive. which is fantastic because you can just hook it up to anything. You can just plug it into an AVR, you can plug it onto anybody's amplifier. Doesn't require any special DSP or processor or anything like that. Still, of course, benefits from having a calibration done when it's installed, but it doesn't require any special DSP or anything like that. When you get up into the Sage models, and you start getting into biamp speakers, so you have a DSP amp that sends part of the signal up to the highs and part of the signal to the lows. Whereas on a passive speaker, you have networks, passive crossover networks with caps and coils and resistors and little things like that in there that they're like a traffic cop. So the full range comes in and then they tell the highs to go here and the lows to go there. With the electronic crossovers, we do that before it ever gets to the speaker. So we can really manipulate the sound much easier and much more efficiently by doing that. In the Sage series, again, we have...
Quickly, before we leave Insight, let's just say that even though you refer to it as good, better, best, in a sense, that good is way better than what an awful lot of the competition is doing. It's already at a different level of good.
Yes. In our world, it's the good, better, best in the wisdom world.
Yes.
As everybody else goes, it would be best, bester, and bestest.
Bestest.
I guess you would say. So, and the nice thing about wisdom is that we use planar magnetics in every single speaker that we build. It doesn't matter if it's in the wall, on the wall, in the ceiling, wherever you put it, other than subwoofers, which don't have high frequency drivers. We don't put a dome tweeter in one to save price. We don't put a cone tweeter in this one to save cost. It's the same technology through our entire line, just bigger or smaller. That's really what changes, point source or line source. So we have these actually printed for us in Southern California, and then we assemble everything in Carson at our factory in Nevada. So they come to us like this. Every single one is inspected. They have a little light machine that they put them on, and every single driver is inspected before it gets tensioned, and put onto a mounting system and add magnets and all that kind of good stuff to it. Yeah.
Well, and again, maybe before you jump into from good to better within the Wisdom family, let's just talk a little bit about the benefits of USA manufacturing, which is all of what you do, which to me are bigger benefits because you're doing unique things. It can still be a benefit even with an off-the-shelf or conventional tweeter, conventional mid-range type product. Let's talk a little bit about why you build in the U.S.
Yeah, so our manufacturing, we are in Carson City, Nevada. That's where we have always been. We've slowly expanded our footprint and taken over an entire 20,000 square foot building that we have. We started with 5,000 square feet and have continued. Plus we have an offsite warehouse that we use as well to keep some finished goods in. But over the last few years, so when COVID hit, just like most companies in this industry, business went like that. We didn't know what was going to happen, but it went crazy, right? And so we went from having no backlog to having a huge backlog of business because our manufacturing, it wasn't really set up for the amount of business that was all of a sudden happening.
Yes.
The good part was, unlike a lot of companies, because we didn't source things from China, other than backlogs, we didn't have delays on shipping product because we controlled all that locally. And since then, we have now incorporated much more of the manufacturing process in-house. For example, our subwoofer enclosures used to be built off-site. We have now got a wood shop, so we build our sub-enclosures in-house. Powder coating was done off-site. It was local, but it was still off-site. We bought a powder coating machine and actually hired away the powder coater from the other powder coating place to work for us. We used to do everything manual, so all of our jigs and our templates that we'd make all of our cuts, because all of our cabinets, except for like the subwoofer cabinets and a couple of our on-wall speakers, are all aluminum, right? So we own our own extrusions, and so the extrusions come in, in like 25-foot pieces, and then we used to have to cut everything manually. We had jigs that we had to cut all the holes manually. We've since got a new CNC and new chop saws, and all that's now automated. So it used to maybe take 2 days, now it takes like 20 minutes. We put in, like I said, our own wood shop. Now we have a paint booth, so we're doing all of our painting in-house. We also bought a gasket maker, because everything's aluminum. You can't put metal on metal, so everything needs a gasket. We used to have that done locally, but we were finding that they would make a gasket, and then, this big gasket, and then the whole middle part, which could be used for 20 more gaskets, they were just thrown away. So when we brought that in-house, we were finding all kinds of things that we can print on this big gasket machine. Of course, we make all of our own electronics. We don't off the shelf our amplifiers from somebody else and then put our name on them. We actually build all that in-house as well. So very tight quality control. Everything is, tested fully before it leaves the factory. All the amps are burnt in for 24 hours. Every speaker goes through a sweep, to verify it against an original, the reference model. And pretty much everything we do can be turned around in 24 to 48 hours from an order.
So you're really, in a sense, getting all the benefits of custom shop type customization for what we need, and yet because it's all under your control, you can turn things around quickly, because sometimes, as you know, custom means waiting 90 to 180 days to get the result that you want. You guys can do it very quickly.
Yeah.
I should mention, by the way, we love having you guys along for the ride. If you haven't as yet and you're enjoying this video, please like and subscribe. Click that little bell icon so you're always notified of our upcoming content.
So the Wisdom series is full planar, no dynamic drivers. 8 octaves will play out of these planar drivers, from 80 hertz all the way past 20K.
That's incredible.
And true line source, so they're literally just a cylinder of sound coming off there, 101 dB efficient, very high output, super low distortion, in-wall, on-wall, freestanding versions. So you can do lots of different applications with our products.
Excellent. Thanks for covering all that. You've also now started talking a little bit about DSP, and let's just talk about, if we have a $1,000 amplifier that we really enjoy, sounds really good, and then we go to, let's say, to a $5,000 amplifier, it's probably going to be lower in distortion, plays louder, has more dynamics, better build quality, all those things. But it's really just a bigger version of what we had at $1,000. With your approach to building your own electronics, which is, I think, outstanding, you get some real benefits because you can now introduce DSP and have much greater individual control. So maybe you could talk about that a little.
Sure. So the nice thing about having DSP amplifiers is that, number one, we're processor agnostic, I like to say. So whether you got a Sony AVR or a Trinov or a Storm, whatever it is, our DSP amps work with everything. The other benefit of having that is that, like Joe said, it's important that we control what the amplifier does and how it matches up to our speakers. Since we do all the measurements on our speakers, we know exactly what the frequency response is. We know where the shortfalls are, or the good parts are. And instead of developing a passive crossover network to fix little things passively, we can do that all electronically in our DSP amps. And they don't just do that. We have a full set of calibration tools built in, so we can do sine wave, white noise, pink noise, polarity pulse. We can do delay, we can do gain, we can do full EQ, level matching. There's so many things that are built in. And the biggest benefit, which has just been, started to realize this year with our DSP amps, because we had to measure every single speaker that we build, and we had to build big jigs for some of them because some of our speakers are ginormous. We bought a Klippel analyzer, which is a $300,000 measurement system. So when you can't put a anechoic chamber in, you can use something like this that can do all your measurements. So what we started doing is FIR filters. And I'm not going to dig too deep into that, but the big benefit of that is really what you guys heard today, the clarity and just how that sound, when you mix a line source speaker with a point source speaker, they have very different phase properties, right? If you looked at a phase graph, it looks just like a frequency response. It should, but usually it looks like this, because at every crossover point, there's a phase change in the speaker. Well, if you have a line source speaker and a point source speaker, they're going to have very different looks of this. And if you try to make those work together, it's almost impossible to have a really seamless sound stage with two different types of speakers. And the reason you would have to have two different types of speakers, and I know it's a long way around on the amps, but if you got a line source for all your main channels, you have point source for Atmos channels, you have two different types of speakers.
That's right.
Right? Or like your theater, you have line source for left and right, all the rest of the speakers are point source.
Right.
So what happens is, and we do this demo at our factory when you come out to our factory, we have an L75 line source, we have a 0.3 GT point source right next to each other. We set up a stereo with one guy talking in the middle. Remember this morning when I said I was having a really hard time getting a center image?
Yes.
So there were some phase problems going on that we fixed, and I found where they were and fixed them. So that takes that center image in. So when you have a line source and a point source and you try to make a stereo image in the middle, it doesn't work. You hear sound, it's almost like you're in the voice. The sound just comes from everywhere. There's not a voice. So we do this demo where we have a mono vocal and just one guy talking. And we have people stand right in the, right in the triangle of the stereo image. And with no FIR filters, they're just like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. And as soon as you turn the FIR filters on, it goes like this. And boom, there's a center channel, which shouldn't be possible when you have two completely different types of speakers. But because of the FIR filters that are built into all of our DSP amps for all of our speakers, and they're automatically on. I mean, when you pick our speaker from the drop-down menu, it automatically loads all that stuff in. You don't have to guess. And it's always there. And it makes such a huge difference, especially as a calibrator, trying to align things that are two different types of speakers like that makes a huge difference. And since we build our amps, we build our speakers, we know what each has to do, we can make a perfect match between the two.
And maybe a good way to kind of wrap up that point just a little bit is to say that a lot of times I think sometimes consumers, even just myself, we sort of assume that one of the benefits of a really great system as opposed to something more entry level or more mid-fi is the ability to play, let's say, a concert video at true concert volumes. And we were playing some things loudly today with no distortion that sounded fantastic. But I think an equally important benefit in the real world, in your home, all the clarity that you've talked about all through this video, it adds up to if you're playing it very softly, you don't want to be, because oftentimes, of course, there might be neighbors that are immediately next door. There might be family members who are trying to sleep while you're trying to enjoy a video or concert video, whatever it is. But if you are playing on so many systems very softly, if they don't have the clarity, you're kind of constantly wanting to turn it up a little bit. A system like the Wisdom system it sounded great before you upgraded all these things over the last 24 hours, Joe, but it sounds amazing right now. One of the benefits of that is if we're playing at low volume levels, you can hear things clearly. And back to that comment that one of our salespeople made, man, I never heard those noises before.
Yeah.
Those sounds before, I should say, not noises. The quality of what you guys have been able to do is just fantastic. Is anything you want to mention about Wisdom before we wrap this up?
No, just excited to be here at Gramophone again. I love working with these guys. There are a lot of passionate people that I've seen the same people for 6 years I've been coming here. So that says a lot about the business, right?
That's right. We thank you folks so much for watching this video, and we really want to invite you specifically now to come to the Timonium stores. We're going to make some upgrades with Wisdom to the other 2 stores as well. But we have stores here in Timonium, Maryland, also Columbia and Gaithersburg, just outside of DC. It's really in the seeing and hearing a high-performance theater that all of this talk we've done just comes together and you say, wow, I want that. And if that is not in the price range of where you're shopping, that's okay, because when we work from the top down, we can kind of settle at whatever is the right area for your budget. So please make an appointment to come visit our showrooms if you can. We love the fact that you've been watching this video. Thank you so much for coming along for the ride. And Joe, thank you for all the effort you've put in over the last 24 hours.
No problem.
We appreciate your support. We look forward to seeing you soon.